It was a bright, sunny Saturday afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of day that made everyone feel like stepping outside and enjoying the warmth. The Thompson family had decided to take full advantage of the beautiful weather and host a small backyard barbecue. The smell of freshly cut grass mixed with the inviting aroma of sizzling burgers and hot dogs filled the air, drifting beyond the backyard fence and into the street. Children ran around laughing, kicking a soccer ball back and forth, while a few of them were perched on the swing set, squealing with joy every time it went higher and higher. The adults were busy setting up folding tables with plates, napkins, condiments, and a colorful spread of side dishes, potato salad, corn on the cob, and bowls of fresh fruit. The scene was cheerful, full of life, and brimming with the simple happiness that only a family gathering could bring. Mrs. Thompson, wearing her favorite apron, was tending to the grill. The burgers sizzled and popped as she carefully flipped them over, making sure each one was perfectly cooked. The smoke from the grill curled up toward the sky, carrying the delicious smell into the neighborhood. Mr. Thompson, the father, was helping the younger kids set up a small badminton net, laughing whenever the shuttlecock went wildly off course. Teenagers, cousins, and family friends mingled, some playing cards on the picnic table while others strolled around, chatting about work, school, or weekend plans. It was the kind of afternoon where time seemed to slow down, where the noise of everyday life faded, and people could just enjoy each other's company without any rush. Even the family dog, a golden retriever named Max, seemed to sense the excitement. He bounded around, wagging his tail, sniffing the food, and occasionally darting after the frisbee the kids were tossing. Max's playful barks added another layer of liveliness to the scene, as the family laughed whenever he ran in circles chasing his own tail. There was a sense of carefree joy in the air, a feeling that this day was made for memories, a day that would linger in everyone's mind long after the sun began to set. The neighborhood itself was quiet, peaceful, and lined with neatly trimmed lawns and colorful flower beds. Birds chirped from the trees, and the soft hum of distant traffic reminded everyone that the outside world was still there, but for the Thompsons, it felt like a little bubble of happiness had formed right in their backyard. Neighbors occasionally waved from across the street, smiling as they passed by, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, carrying the sounds and smells of the barbecue just far enough to make passers-by curious, but not enough to disturb the calm of the neighborhood. There was something almost cinematic about the scene, the sun shining warmly, children playing without a care, the sizzle of food on the grill, and family members chatting and laughing. Each little detail made the afternoon feel perfect. It wasn't just about the food or the games, it was about the feeling of togetherness, the small joys that often go unnoticed during busy weeks. Even the smallest moments, a child showing off a trick with the soccer ball, Mrs. Thompson sprinkling seasoning on a burger, or Mr. Thompson tossing a frisbee to Max, added to the richness of the day. Everyone seemed to be connected by this shared sense of happiness, and it was almost impossible not to smile just by being there. What made it even more special was that it wasn't a formal party. There were no fancy decorations or strict schedules. It was spontaneous, relaxed, and full of laughter that came naturally. Drinks were poured into plastic cups, napkins were scattered on the table, and everyone grabbed a plate whenever they felt hungry. The atmosphere was warm, welcoming, and inclusive, the kind of scene that made anyone who entered feel like they were part of the family, even if they had only just met. Little did anyone know, this ordinary, cheerful afternoon was about to take an unexpected turn. The neighborhood was quiet, the barbecue was in full swing, and everything seemed perfect, but sometimes, even the calmest, most joyful days can hold surprises just around the corner. For now, though, the Thompsons were enjoying the simple pleasures of life, completely unaware of the twist that would soon make this sunny Saturday afternoon unforgettable. Across the street from the Thompsons' lively backyard, in a house with neatly trimmed hedges and a perfectly painted fence, lived Mr. Daniels. Unlike the cheerful atmosphere next door, his house was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the walls themselves preferred peace over laughter. Mr. Daniels was a man who liked order, routine, and control. He woke up at the same time every day, drank his coffee from the same mug, and spent his evenings reading newspapers or watching crime shows on television. The neighborhood had long known him as the kind of person who noticed every little detail, the position of a garden gnome, the angle of a mailbox, the slight tilt of a car in the driveway. While most neighbors accepted him as a quiet, if somewhat fussy, resident, few would call him fun. On this particular Saturday, Mr. Daniels' morning had been calm and uneventful. He had sipped his coffee, glanced through the newspaper, and tended to his small rose garden, carefully pruning each stem and admiring the symmetry of his flowers. But as the afternoon wore on, a new sound began to drift across the street, the laughter of children, the soft hum of conversation, and, most distinctly, the sizzle of a barbecue. At first, he tried to ignore it, focusing instead on trimming a bush just so, but the noise seemed to grow louder with every passing minute. The children's laughter, the clatter of plates, and even the dog's playful barks began to feel like a personal intrusion into his carefully ordered day. Mr. Daniels leaned back in his chair, squinting at the Thompson backyard. The scene that others might have found charming now felt overwhelming to him. The neighbors were clearly enjoying themselves, oblivious to the fact that someone across the street was feeling disturbed by their joy. He noticed the way Mr. Thompson moved between the grill and the table, smiling and chatting, how the children ran in wide arcs across the lawn, and how Max, the golden retriever, darted around like a whirlwind of fur and energy. For anyone else, it would have been a perfect, idyllic scene. For Mr. Daniels, it was chaos. A frown creased his forehead as he muttered to himself, "How can they be so loud? Doesn't anyone care about peace?" He felt a surge of irritation, a mix of frustration and disbelief. He had always prided himself on maintaining control over his own space, and suddenly, it felt as if the entire neighborhood had turned against him. The cheerful atmosphere that might have warmed other hearts only seemed to irritate him further. He began pacing his living room, glancing repeatedly out the window, counting the number of people at the gathering, trying to convince himself that he was overreacting, but the more he observed, the more justified he felt. Eventually, he made a decision. If nobody else could restore order, he would have to take matters into his own hands. He picked up the phone with a sense of purpose and dialed the local police station. In his mind, he wasn't being petty or unreasonable, he was acting as a responsible citizen. The voices from next door had grown too loud, the crowd too large, and he needed help. As he spoke to the dispatcher, explaining the disturbance and the noise problem, he emphasized the urgency in his voice, believing that only official intervention could restore peace to his day. Meanwhile, back in the Thompson backyard, the family remained blissfully unaware of the brewing tension. Laughter rang out, food was passed around, and Max chased the frisbee with relentless energy. The air was filled with warmth and cheer, completely contrasting the quiet storm that was building just across the street. The contrast was almost ironic, the same neighborhood, two entirely different experiences, separated only by a single stretch of road. Little did Mr. Daniels know that his call would not lead to the outcome he imagined. He was unaware that the man orchestrating the barbecue, the one flipping burgers and laughing with the children, was no ordinary neighbor. Mr. Thompson had recently been appointed the new police chief, a fact that added an unexpected twist to the otherwise mundane situation. The very person Mr. Daniels had called for help was, in fact, the authority figure he was reporting to. And this realization, though yet to come, would turn what seemed like a simple complaint into an unforgettable, awkward, and humorous encounter that would leave the entire neighborhood talking. As the phone call ended, Mr. Daniels sat back, a small sense of satisfaction washing over him. He believed he had done the right thing, taken control of the situation, and ensured that order would be restored. He had no idea that the next few minutes would teach him a lesson about assumptions, perspective, and the unexpected twists life can throw even on the quietest of Saturdays. The phone call had been made, and Mr. Daniels leaned back in his chair, certain that within minutes, his peaceful Saturday would be restored. He imagined the officers arriving, speaking firmly to the family, and somehow calming the chaos that had invaded his quiet street. In his mind, the plan was perfect, swift, decisive, and entirely justified. He didn't consider, even for a second, that life often has a way of adding twists that no one can predict. Across the street, in the Thompson backyard, laughter continued unabated. Mr. Thompson flipped a burger, placing it perfectly onto a bun before handing it to his youngest daughter, who grinned as she sprinkled ketchup on top. The teenagers were tossing a frisbee back and forth, shouting jokes and cheering every small success, while the younger children played tag, their shrieks of delight mixing with the sounds of Max's playful barking. Nothing about the scene seemed alarming to anyone present. It was, after all, a simple family barbecue, full of joy, warmth, and togetherness. The distant sound of sirens slowly began to cut through the cheerful noise, a faint wail that grew steadily louder. The children paused mid-play, glancing around curiously, while the adults turned their heads toward the street, a hint of confusion on their faces. That's unusual," Mrs. Thompson said, tilting her head. Mr. Thompson, still holding the spatula, squinted toward the approaching vehicles, a small smile forming as he noticed the familiar insignia on the side of the first police car. It wasn't fear that flickered across his expression, it was mild amusement, an awareness that something unusual was about to happen. As the cars pulled into the driveway, officers stepped out, their faces professional but careful, scanning the scene before them. Mr. Daniels, from his window, watched eagerly, imagining the polite but firm conversation about to unfold. He pictured the officers lecturing the family, ensuring they respected neighborhood rules, and finally restoring calm. He had no idea that his expectations were about to be completely upended. The front gate swung open, and the officers approached the group. Mr. Thompson greeted them with his usual warmth, smiling and extending a hand. "Good afternoon, officers. What brings you here today?" he asked casually, as if the presence of uniformed police was no big deal. The officers exchanged a brief, subtle glance, a flicker of realization passing between them. This was not just any family. One of them leaned slightly closer and whispered something to the other, their expressions a mix of surprise and amusement. Meanwhile, Mr. Daniels' excitement turned to confusion as he watched the unfolding scene from his window. The officers were talking politely, even laughing quietly, while Mr. Thompson nodded and gestured toward the barbecue. It was clear something about the situation was unexpected, something he hadn't anticipated. He furrowed his brow, trying to piece it together, but the truth hadn't hit him yet. The very man he had called about, the father in the backyard, was the newly appointed police chief. The irony of the moment was almost cinematic. Mr. Daniels had called for help, expecting the officers to correct what he perceived as disorder, and yet the person in charge, the authority figure himself, was standing calmly among the laughter and chaos, treating it as nothing more than a normal, happy Saturday afternoon. The officers, fully aware of who he was, didn't reprimand or lecture, they simply observed, ready to intervene if necessary but clearly enjoying the absurdity of the situation. Mr. Thompson's calm demeanor and polite humor diffused the tension immediately. He shook hands with the officers, thanked them for checking in, and even offered a plate of food. The barbecue, once at risk of disruption, continued without a hitch, laughter resuming as if the sirens and cars had never appeared. For the first time, Mr. Daniels felt a strange, uneasy mix of embarrassment, disbelief, and curiosity. His carefully constructed plan to restore order had been completely overturned by an unforeseen twist. By the time the officers left, nodding and smiling at the cheerful family, the situation had been completely diffused. The Thompsons resumed their games, their conversations, and their simple joy. Mr. Daniels, however, remained staring from his window, finally realizing that the chaos he had feared was harmless, and that sometimes, assumptions can lead to the most unexpected lessons in humility, perspective, and humor. The neighborhood, for a brief moment, had witnessed a rare mix of irony and comedy, a story that would soon become a memorable anecdote for everyone involved. What had begun as a simple complaint transformed into a life lesson about expectations, misunderstandings, and the unpredictable nature of real life. The Thompsons had no idea what was about to unfold. The day had started as a simple, joyful family barbecue, sunshine, laughter, sizzling food, and the sound of Max, the golden retriever, chasing after every frisbee or ball that came his way. They were all enjoying themselves without a care in the world, oblivious to the fact that just across the street, Mr. Daniels had already called the police. When the police cars first appeared, the family had paused for a moment, surprised but not alarmed. After all, it wasn't unusual for officers to patrol the neighborhood, and the Thompsons were used to seeing them occasionally. But as the officers stepped out and walked toward the backyard, the scene took an unexpected turn. The children, still holding their toys, watched curiously, while Mrs. Thompson wiped her hands on a towel and walked over to greet the visitors. "Good afternoon, officers. What brings you here?" Mr. Thompson asked with a casual smile, his voice calm and welcoming. There was no hint of worry, no sign of tension, just the warmth and friendliness that had always defined him. But as the officers spoke quietly among themselves, a flicker of recognition passed over their faces. One of them leaned slightly closer to another, whispering under his breath, their eyes widening in surprise. And then it clicked. The moment was so perfectly ironic that it could have been written in a movie script. Mr. Thompson, the very man standing in the middle of the backyard with a spatula in his hand, flipping burgers and chatting with the children, was not just a regular neighbor, he was the newly appointed police chief of the city. The realization stunned everyone, from the officers to the kids, and most importantly, Mr. Daniels, who was still watching from his window across the street. For a brief moment, there was silence. The children blinked, unsure of what was happening. Max, sensing the shift in energy, paused mid-run, his tail slowly lowering. Mrs. Thompson's eyes widened slightly in surprise, though she quickly smiled, realizing what had just occurred. The officers, now fully aware of the situation, struggled to contain a chuckle, exchanging amused glances. What had started as a routine visit was now a scene of irony, humor, and mild embarrassment. The family's reaction was both composed and graceful. Mr. Thompson set down the spatula and walked over to the officers, extending his hand in greeting. "It's nice to see you here," he said warmly, his tone light and welcoming. "Is there a problem I should know about?" His question was casual, almost teasing, but there was a polite firmness in his voice that reminded everyone present of his authority. The officers, careful not to embarrass the family or themselves, quickly explained that a neighbor had called about a disturbance. Mr. Thompson nodded, listening attentively, and then addressed the children. "Looks like someone across the street thinks we're a little too lively today," he said with a smile. The children giggled, the tension melting away instantly. Even Mrs. Thompson laughed softly, shaking her head at the absurdity of the situation. From his perch across the street, Mr. Daniels could hardly believe what he was seeing. The man he had called the police on, the father, the host of the barbecue, was literally the head of the police department. He froze, unsure whether to hide, apologize, or pretend this had never happened. The officers, aware of his bewilderment, offered polite smiles before heading back to their cars, leaving the family to continue their barbecue uninterrupted. Once the police had left, the backyard erupted in laughter again. Mr. Thompson returned to the grill, flipping another burger with ease, while Mrs. Thompson served drinks to the children and teenagers. Max barked joyfully as he chased a frisbee once more, and the earlier tension dissolved completely. The family had faced the unexpected with grace and humor, turning what could have been an awkward or uncomfortable encounter into a story they would laugh about for years to come. This unexpected twist, the realization that the very person Mr. Daniels had complained about was the police chief, was a lesson in humility, perspective, and the unpredictable nature of life. It reminded everyone that sometimes, assumptions can lead to the most surprising and amusing consequences, and that a simple Saturday afternoon could become an unforgettable memory. For the Thompsons, life returned to its joyful rhythm, with laughter, food, and togetherness filling the air. And though the day had started like any ordinary weekend, it had turned into a story full of irony, humor, and a twist that nobody in the neighborhood would forget anytime soon. As the police officers stepped back toward their cars, the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. The Thompsons' backyard, once filled only with laughter and the smell of grilled food, now had a subtle tension, a strange mix of amusement and awkwardness lingering in the air. Mr. Daniels, across the street, was frozen by the window, his jaw slightly open, struggling to process the irony of the situation. He had called the police expecting order, control, and perhaps a small lecture for the noisy family, and instead, he had witnessed the very father of the household, the new police chief, standing calmly, smiling, and even cracking light jokes. Mr. Daniels felt a wave of panic. His face turned red as he realized the absurdity of his complaint. The man he had expected to be corrected, perhaps even scolded, had been the authority himself. For the first time, the neat lines of his orderly Saturday afternoon were blurred by embarrassment and disbelief. Hesitating, he stepped outside, unsure whether to apologize, hide, or retreat back inside. Mr. Thompson, noticing movement from across the street, waved warmly. "Hello there. Having a good afternoon?" he called, his voice friendly, yet with a hint of playful irony. Mr. Daniels froze in place, caught off guard by the warmth and lack of animosity in the words. He opened his mouth to respond but found himself tongue-tied. Every possible apology he could think of sounded inadequate in the face of the situation's irony. The officers, now watching from their vehicles, struggled to contain quiet chuckles, aware of the awkwardness that was about to unfold. One of them leaned over to the other and whispered, "I don't think he realized who he was calling," earning a barely suppressed laugh from both. It was a rare moment when professionalism mixed with human amusement, and the scene outside the Thompson backyard became almost cinematic in its comedy. Mr. Thompson, sensing the neighbors' discomfort, decided to ease the situation. He set down his spatula and walked closer to the fence, his expression calm and approachable. "I understand there might have been a misunderstanding," he said politely, "but please, there's no need to worry. We're just having a small family get-together." His tone was firm enough to assert authority but gentle enough to disarm any lingering tension. Mr. Daniels, finally finding his voice, mumbled something about being concerned about noise and disruption. His words came out in a rush, a mix of nervousness and embarrassment. I just thought, well, it seemed loud, and I wanted to make sure everything was under control." His voice trailed off, realizing that every word sounded more foolish than the last. The children, sensing the tension but not fully understanding it, peeked through the fence, curious about the neighbor's sudden appearance. Max, the golden retriever, barked once, as if adding comedic timing to the awkward encounter. Mrs. Thompson appeared behind her husband, smiling warmly, ready to assist in smoothing things over. Mr. Thompson nodded slightly, acknowledging the neighbor's concern. "I appreciate that you care about the neighborhood," he said, "but I assure you, everything here is perfectly fine. There's no disturbance, just a family enjoying a sunny Saturday together." He gestured toward the children playing and the burgers sizzling on the grill. The simple visual proof of normalcy helped ease some of the neighbors' tension, though his embarrassment lingered. For a few moments, the two men stood there, the air thick with irony and silent amusement. Mr. Daniels shifted nervously from foot to foot, unsure of how to proceed. Meanwhile, the officers quietly observed, smiling politely, appreciating the unexpected comedy of the situation. What could have been an awkward confrontation filled with accusations and scolding had transformed into a surreal, almost humorous encounter. Finally, realizing the futility of any further resistance, Mr. Daniels took a deep breath. I'm sorry," he said softly, his words genuine, tinged with humility. "I didn't know. I mean, I didn't realize who you were." He trailed off, shaking his head at his own misjudgment. Mr. Thompson chuckled lightly, a friendly laugh that carried no malice. "No worries at all," he said, extending a hand in reconciliation. "We all make assumptions sometimes. I hope this won't stop you from enjoying your Saturday too." The gesture was simple, yet it dissolved the awkward tension completely. With the neighbor's apology accepted and the officers ready to leave, the atmosphere shifted back to one of warmth, laughter, and lightheartedness. The backyard resumed its cheerful rhythm, the earlier tension melting away like morning fog under the sun. The awkward confrontation had ended not with anger or frustration, but with a lesson in humility, perspective, and the unexpected humor life often provides. For the Thompsons, it was just another story to add to their collection of memories. For Mr. Daniels, it was a lesson he would never forget, a reminder that sometimes, the universe has a way of humbling even the most orderly, most confident of us. The awkwardness slowly faded, and the Thompson family returned to their backyard activities, though now the story of the unexpected visit had added a new layer of excitement to their Saturday afternoon. Mr. Daniels, still standing across the street, felt a mixture of embarrassment, relief, and a strange curiosity. He had expected a stern confrontation, perhaps a lecture from the police, and instead, he had witnessed something almost surreal, a family barbecue continuing as if nothing unusual had occurred, led by the very police chief he had called. Inside the Thompson backyard, life resumed its cheerful rhythm. The children ran, laughed, and chased Max across the lawn, as if the earlier tension had never existed. The teenagers returned to tossing the frisbee, occasionally glancing at their parents with playful smiles, knowing that today's story would become legendary. Mrs. Thompson served another plate of burgers, chatting with the visiting neighbors who had come to enjoy the aroma of grilled food and the warmth of the sunny afternoon. Even the adults who had initially been concerned about the police presence now laughed at the unexpected turn of events, recounting it in playful exaggeration. Mr. Thompson returned to his spot by the grill, carefully flipping burgers with the calm and ease of someone who knew the day was theirs to enjoy. He glanced toward Mr. Daniels and gave a friendly wave, acknowledging the neighbor's presence without judgment or anger. The subtle gesture was a reminder that the incident, while embarrassing for Mr. Daniels, was not personal. It was a gentle way of saying, "All is well. Let's move on." Across the street, Mr. Daniels finally made a decision. He stepped back from the window, retreating into the quiet of his house, his mind spinning with the events that had unfolded. The realization of his mistake weighed on him, but it also left room for reflection. He had overreacted, jumping to conclusions about a family enjoying a simple Saturday. He had allowed assumptions to dictate his actions, only to find that reality had an unexpected, humbling twist. The police chief had been kind, composed, and gracious, a stark contrast to the rigid image Mr. Daniels had imagined. The officers, meanwhile, returned to their vehicles, still sharing quiet smiles about the irony of the situation. They had witnessed the unusual combination of humor, humility, and grace unfold in a way few expected. For them, it was another reminder that every neighborhood call can hold surprises, and that real life often writes the most unexpected stories. Back in the backyard, the barbecue continued uninterrupted. Conversations flowed easily, laughter rose and fell with the rhythm of the day, and the children's squeals echoed in harmony with Max's joyful barking. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky with warm shades of orange and gold. Plates were refilled, drinks were poured, and stories were shared, some from earlier that day, and some from memories of past gatherings. Yet even as the family celebrated the ordinary joys of a Saturday afternoon, the extraordinary twist of the police visit lingered in the background, turning a simple gathering into a memorable tale. By the time evening arrived, the neighborhood had resumed its usual calm. Mr. Daniels had retreated into his quiet routine, now carrying a mix of relief and humility. The Thompsons, meanwhile, had created a story they would retell countless times, a story of laughter, irony, and a neighborly misunderstanding that had unexpectedly highlighted the father's new role as the city's police chief. The barbecue, once a simple event, had become a symbol of resilience, grace, and humor in the face of an awkward situation. In the end, the resolution was not just about diffusing tension, it was about perspective. Mr. Daniels learned that assumptions can be misleading, that a little humility goes a long way, and that sometimes, life has a sense of humor stronger than any of us. The Thompsons, on the other hand, were reminded of the power of composure, kindness, and the ability to turn even awkward moments into laughter. The neighborhood returned to its quiet Saturday rhythm, but the story of the barbecue and the unexpected confrontation. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold, the Thompson family's backyard was buzzing not just with the sounds of children playing and burgers sizzling, but also with the quiet ripple of a story that had begun to spread through the neighborhood. Word travels fast in small communities, and by mid-afternoon, neighbors who had glimpsed the unusual scene from their windows or heard snippets of the story were already exchanging whispers and chuckles. The tale of the family barbecue and the surprise visit from the police had become something of a legend, one that combined humor, irony, and just a hint of drama. Across the street, Mr. Daniels was still processing the events of the day. At first, he had been embarrassed and uneasy, but slowly, a sense of humility settled over him. The realization that his assumptions had led to an unnecessary call brought both chagrin and a small, reluctant amusement. He wasn't alone in this. Other neighbors, having caught pieces of the story, were now watching and chuckling at the remarkable twist that had unfolded right in their midst. People talked about it quietly at first, in passing, sharing the story with friends and family, until it began to take on a life of its own. By early evening, the news had reached almost every household on the block. Neighbors gathered in small groups, discussing the incident over fences, porches, and driveways. "Did you hear about the Thompson barbecue?" one neighbor would ask, eyebrows raised in mock seriousness. "The father? He's the new police chief. Can you believe it?" Laughter followed immediately, as the irony of the situation sank in. The story spread like wildfire, with each retelling adding a touch of exaggeration, a bit of humor, and a little dramatic flair. The children, of course, were thrilled. They had watched the whole scene unfold, and now they had bragging rights for weeks to come. "Mom, Dad, remember when the police came to our backyard?" "And Dad was the police chief?" one of them asked repeatedly, unable to contain the excitement. Each retelling drew more giggles, more wide-eyed stares, and a renewed sense of pride in their family's ability to handle the situation with humor and grace. Even the more distant neighbors, who hadn't seen the incident firsthand, heard about it through social media posts, text messages, and word of mouth. The story resonated because it was so relatable, an ordinary day transformed by an extraordinary twist. It wasn't just the police visit that intrigued people, it was the way Mr. Thompson had handled the situation, with calm composure, subtle humor, and a sense of fairness that disarmed everyone, including the nervous neighbor who had made the call. The tale became a conversation starter, a way for the community to share a laugh and marvel at the unpredictability of life. By the evening, the neighborhood block group was buzzing with messages about the barbecue. Pictures were shared, emojis flew across screens, and neighbors posted playful comments about the incident. People expressed admiration for the family's handling of the event and poked gentle fun at Mr. Daniels' overreaction. Even those who hadn't been directly involved found themselves drawn into the story, laughing at the irony, and marveling at the lesson in humility it had offered. For the Thompsons, this reaction was both humbling and amusing. They had always enjoyed the warmth and camaraderie of their neighborhood, but this experience showed them a new dimension of connection. The community wasn't just observing them, it was reacting, participating, and sharing in the story. Every chuckle, every post, every whispered retelling was a reminder of how a simple family barbecue, combined with an unexpected twist, could bring people together in laughter and surprise. By the time night fell, the story had taken on almost a legendary status in the neighborhood. The children went to bed dreaming of the day's events, the parents reflected on the lessons learned, and the community settled into quiet conversations about the surprising and humorous twist of life. What had started as a typical Saturday barbecue had become a story of irony, humor, and shared experience, a story that would be retold for months, perhaps even years, as a reminder of how unexpected events can unite people in laughter, humility, and the joy of living in a close-knit community. As the night settled over the quiet suburban street, the Thompsons' backyard finally grew calm. The laughter of children had faded into tired giggles, the sizzle of the grill had quieted, and Max, the golden retriever, lay sprawled on the grass, his tail thumping softly as he drifted off to sleep. The day that had begun like any ordinary Saturday had become a memorable tale of irony, humor, and unexpected lessons, leaving everyone involved with a story they would carry for a lifetime. Mr. Thompson, sitting in his favorite chair by the picnic table, reflected on the day's events. What had initially seemed like a minor disruption, a neighbor's call to the police, had turned into a series of moments filled with laughter, awkwardness, and humility. He thought about Mr. Daniels, the neighbor across the street, who had acted out of genuine concern but whose assumptions had led to a situation both ironic and humorous. It was a reminder that people's perspectives could differ wildly, and that sometimes, even well-intentioned actions could create unexpected consequences. Mrs. Thompson joined her husband, carrying a cup of iced tea. They sat together in comfortable silence for a moment, letting the cool evening air wash over them. She smiled, shaking her head at the memory of the officer's subtle amusement and Mr. Daniel's stunned expression. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes life just writes its own little plot twists." Mr. Thompson laughed quietly, nodding in agreement. "Yes, and it's our job to handle them with grace and humor," he replied. The family's children, now settled in their beds, had been buzzing with excitement and retelling the events in their own imaginative ways. The story of the police visit, the neighbor's surprise, and their father's calm handling of the situation would be retold countless times, each retelling growing in drama and humor. Even Max, though asleep, seemed to carry a sense of satisfaction, as if he too understood that this had been a day unlike any other. Across the street, Mr. Daniels finally retreated indoors, closing his blinds with a mix of relief and humility. He had learned a quiet, personal lesson, one about assumptions, expectations, and the unpredictability of life. His actions, while motivated by a desire for order, had led to embarrassment and amusement, and he now carried a newfound respect for his neighbors and the patience they had shown. There was no anger, no resentment, only the subtle understanding that sometimes, people are far more complex than we first assume. In the days that followed, the neighborhood would continue to talk about the barbecue. Friends, neighbors, and even distant acquaintances would recount the story with laughter, marveling at the irony and charm of the situation. The tale became a shared experience, a story that brought people together through humor and humility. It was a reminder that life doesn't always go according to plan, that misunderstandings happen, and that how we respond to those moments often defines the memories we create. For the Thompsons, the moral was clear. A single moment of potential tension had transformed into an opportunity to demonstrate kindness, patience, and grace. Their composure had diffused embarrassment, their humor had softened awkwardness, and their ability to treat others with respect had turned a potentially stressful situation into a story of joy. The barbecue, which could have ended with conflict, instead ended with laughter, understanding, and a community sharing a moment of human connection. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, the street returned to its calm, quiet rhythm. The day's events would remain alive in the memories of those who had witnessed them, the irony of the call, the neighbor's shock, the officer's subtle amusement, and the family's unwavering calm. It was a story of life's unexpected twists, of perspective, and of the importance of handling surprises with humor and grace. And as the Thompsons closed the gates and carried the last plates indoors, they knew that even in ordinary moments, extraordinary lessons could be found. Life, they realized, had a way of reminding everyone that humility, patience, and laughter were sometimes the best responses to the most unexpected situations, and that the memories created in such moments often outlast the ordinary days that came before.